Welcome to CareCast, CareNet's podcast on family, faith, and life with Roland Warren, CareNet's president and CEO, and Vincent DiCaro, CareNet's chief outreach officer. CareCast and more pro-abundant life commentary from CareNet can be found at care-net.org, where you can watch videos, download ebooks, and subscribe to the Abundant Life blog. Now let's listen in on what Roland and Vince have for us this week on CareCast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CareCast, the CareNet podcast on family, faith, and life. With me, Vincent DiCaro, and this guy here, Roland Warren, president and CEO of CareNet. I am the chief outreach officer of CareNet. For those of you who don't know, Roland, you and I worked together at the National Fatherhood Initiative for many years before we came to CareNet. You came to CareNet a little bit before I did by a few years, but we certainly have a pretty extensive background in talking and thinking about fatherhood. And certainly we've done, I think, have led a really major effort here at CareNet to sort of make fatherhood and marriage programming just part of what happens in the pregnancy center movement. Not an add-on, an extra, or anything like that, but just woven into the very fabric of what we do as pregnancy centers because of the important role that fathers in marriage play in this issue. And so we're always keeping our eyes out for really good information about fatherhood. And a brand new study actually just came out over the summer. It still is summer.
Yeah.
It just feels,
I know.
September hits and it feels like fall, but it really is still summer. So this summer, a new study came out spearheaded by Professor Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia. He's been doing this for many, many years. Yeah. In fact, I think we worked with him at NFI in some formal ways.
He did some studies for us too.
He did. He did a study for us.
He was just a young pup then.
I know. It's amazing. He's been doing this for 20 plus years, it seems. It was a study called Good Fathers, Flourishing Kids, the Importance of Fatherhood in Virginia. So it was a state-specific state. So it was a combined insight of 6 scholars at 6 national or Virginia-based organizations, okay? And so it was relied on data drawn from the 2022 and 2023 national surveys on children's health for more than 1,300 children. So big, extensive study using a lot of really good data. And of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, we sort of suspect this stuff, but what they found was that having an engaged dad at home, that's key. Having an engaged dad at home has a profound positive impact on a child's life for his or her entire life. Yeah. Okay? Doesn't surprise us. We've been seeing, and I say that not out of arrogance or anything like that, but you and I.
You could say other things out of arrogance.
I say many things out of arrogance, but not this. In fact, we were just talking about my hair. No, I don't. So,
and those of you who don't know, Vince can see the mirror.
Yeah, there's a mirror. Yeah,
I cannot see the mirror, and he set this room up to position so he could see the mirror. It's so he doesn't care what I look like at all.
It's purely coincidental.
I could look hideous. I had no idea.
You look wonderful. The lighting is such that we have to position ourselves in certain ways, so that's why you're there.
And the mirror.
The mirror has nothing to do with it, I promise.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
But my hair does look pretty good. Anyway, so I just have to not be distracted by it. Gee whiz. Anyway, so I don't even know where we're going. We had something so profound and important to say about fatherhood. Oh, yes. So that you and I have been looking at this data for years and years and years. And so again, we're not making assumptions or just we just think dads are great and we're just going to say that we used to publish a book back at National Fatherhood Initiative called Father Facts. Yep. And it was a review of all of the social science research that was being done about fatherhood and marriage. And really for the last several decades, there is just reams and reams and reams of evidence from the social sciences that good involved fathers, particularly ones who are married to the mothers of their children and present in the home, have an enormous positive impact on child well-being. And we're just finding this over and over and over again. In fact, I don't think there's a single study that's ever found that there's some sort of disadvantage to having a father in the home.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, really, no, an involved, responsible, and committed father is just critical to the well-being of children. And that was something that we spent a lot of time in the public square talking about, that fathers often can be viewed as kind of superfluous, like nice to have around, but not essential to the well-being of children. And the data just doesn't reflect that at all.
Right,
and,
sure.
And certainly through a biblical narrative, you see the same thing. And that's what we've sort of talked about over the years in terms of the connection of the fatherhood issue to the life issue. And those things are absolutely connected.
Yeah. Why don't you go a little deeper on that, because we some folks will often ask us, as a pro-life organization, why are you guys so focused on fathers? Why don't you kind of talk a little bit?
Yeah, and really that was really part of the whole notion of being kind of pro-abundant life in terms of being pro-life, right? Because the pro-abundant life perspective is really focused on God's design for family and then God's call to discipleship, right? That's the first pillar. So we talk about that quite a bit in The Alternative to Abortion.
By Roland Warren, right there.
Yeah, right there.
There's the author. There's the book. Yep.
Right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Coincidentally, I don't even know how that got there.
I have no idea. It was just mystical.
It showed up. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we talk about that quite a bit. And if you're looking at like the distinction between being pro-life and being pro-abundant life, a key aspect of that is God's design for family, and God's design for family does not happen, right? The high idea of God's design for family doesn't happen without fathers. And you see that reflected in the birth of Christ, right? And so one of the central questions that we always ask around here is that, hey, if a woman came to you facing an unplanned pregnancy and you could change everything except the fact that she was pregnant, as a Christian in particular, and from the social science perspective, if you could change everything except the fact that she was pregnant, what would you want to have happen? Well, you walk through that. You want the guy to be there? Yeah, what? There's a baby daddy bringing diapers every now and then? Well, can we do better than that? I mean, you can change everything, right? What you should want is a father and mother united in marriage, loving each other, loving their child, and loving God. That's the high idea. So that role of the father in that context is critically important, and that's what we see. Because God locked himself into that perspective, because in Isaiah 7:14, it says that a virgin will, conceive and bear, right? So God, in his word, locked himself in to a perspective.
Yeah.
That, I'm locked in. I can change everything. I won't violate my word. I can change everything except the fact that Mary was pregnant. And what did he do? He created a family, called an angel to Joseph to be a husband to her, a father to the child growing inside of her. That's right. Yep. So that perspective is pretty clear. And then that's what you also see in the data. 87% of the women that have abortions are unmarried, which means that they don't have someone who says, like Joseph, I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you, which makes them more likely to have an abortion.
Right.
So this issue, the fatherhood issue, is connected to so many different things. And we saw it over the years. Pretty much all the most intractable social ills that we talk about in the public square, whether it's teen pregnancy, violence, low academic performance, poverty. I mean, all of these issues, maternal child health, all of those issues have a father factor that's connected to them. When there's not an involved, responsible, and committed father in that context, and particularly married to the mother of the child, you're much more likely to see these intractable social ills. And this is kind of what Brad's talking about in this study.
Yeah. This is interesting because shortly after we read about this brand new study, we saw another really interesting article. It was actually an opinion piece published in the New York Times. It was entitled, "Boy Crisis of 2025, Meet the Boy Problem of the 1900s." So apparently in the early part of the 1900s, there was an emerging boy problem in the United States, where lots of boys were sort of running wild, so to speak, in kind of growing urban settings in the United States. Lots of immigrants. I'm a child of Italian immigrants that moved to New York City. That was probably part of that issue there, where there was a lot of boys that didn't really have any place to go, any direction, kind of in a new land, so to speak. And so there's this boy problem that was emerging, and then our society started to try to devise ways of dealing with that, and I think was actually pretty darn successful. But now we're facing another boy crisis, right? So the two authors, Robert Putnam and Richard Reeves, they've been studying this issue for quite a few years now, and they came to some pretty interesting and very good conclusions and theories around what's happening with boys today in our culture. For me, one of the most interesting conclusions that they came to in this article in studying the boy crisis was the notion that things like the YMCA and the Boy Scouts and other institutions that were formed in the early 1900s or at the turn of the century, at that time, those things were formed to help boys and give boys guidance, right? Today, all of those, institutions that were formed for boys have actually been made co-ed. They're co-ed now.
Or they're majority female.
Or they're majority female. Yeah, in fact, they said the YMCA, right, Young Male Christian what Young Men's Christian Association. Yeah. The word men is literally in there, the YMCA, right? I think their entire executive team is actually women now, and 60% of the membership is female.
Yes. And there's the YW.
And there is still the YWCA. That was the point that they were making, right? Is that men's and boys' institutions have become co-ed, but the female equivalents have remained single sex for women only, with the express purpose of actually empowering and helping women, right? And so the YWCA, the Girl Scouts, those are still just for women.
And the Boy Scouts have now become scouting.
Boy Scouts was made co-ed, YMCA is co-ed, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's no longer, touch points or places in our culture for boys to sort of be boys and to gather and to be mentored and all these other important things. So I thought that was a brilliant and brave insight that they had there. I don't know what they necessarily think is the solution to that. My suspicion is that they probably would have sort of a cowardly out on some of those things, to be perfectly honest with you. That's just my opinion. They would say it's perfectly fine that they're co-ed as long as blah, blah, blah. But I don't think they would probably question, would they also say that the Girl Scouts and the YWCA should be completely opened up to boys and no longer have the express purpose of empowering girls? I doubt the authors would say that. They're fine with that happening for boys, although they do question the consequences of that. But that's sort of an aside for a moment. That's just my personal opinion on that. But it was a good point that they made, and I'm glad they made it. However, as you noted, I think there was one phrase and one sentence in the article where they hinted at the importance of family. And it was very, you had to really read into it to find it. So they really didn't say anything in there about the importance of marriage and fatherhood and the impact that has on the upbringing of boys.
No, and it's interesting because in the 1900s, what caused this big problem actually was industrialization and the fact that fathers were now outside of the home and they were in factories versus on farms where he was there as part of the family system. And now increasingly, right, he was outside of the home. And the direct impact of that, actually interesting, was not on daughters. It was actually on sons. And this is kind of this whole perspective, which is like, how do you grow good men without fathers?
Right.
How do you do that? And I think in this article, one of the points that they make, if my memory serves me correct, that pretty much every society, if you will, has had, or through history, has had some issue with boys, but not a problem like with girls. In the same context. Right. So you take the fathers out of the home with industrialization. And it didn't have an equal effect on boys and girls. It had a bigger, I'm sure there was some impact on girls, but it had a much bigger impact on boys because girls still had their mothers there who were modeling for them what it meant to be a woman and all that stuff. But increasingly, they didn't have men there that were providing that structure and that modeling for them. And so these institutions were designed to kind of help build that back up. So if you're at the YWCA or if you're part of the Boy Scouts, and I know this from raising boys, many of the men who were involved in those
YMCA,
were actually married men.
That's right.
Boy Scouts, married men. So they were modeling what it meant not just to be a man, but also to be a husband and a father in that context.
For sure.
Because we had a very high marriage rate at that time. It wasn't a bunch of single men who said, hey, I'm going to be Boy Scout leaders. That's not the way that it worked. So even if you were a boy who was growing up without a father in your life, you were seeing an example of what it meant to be a good man in that context.
And probably churches certainly played a role in that for sure too.
Absolutely.
And now church attendance is down.
You see what I'm saying? So now we're here. And in 1900, they at least had the benefit of a cultural norm of marriage with fathers and mothers connected in that context.
That's right.
Even in that context. Now we've got the same kind of dynamic going on, but we've actually done even a worse thing because we've delinked motherhood, fatherhood, sex, and marriage. And now into that.
Yes.
We have an even bigger problem. Going on.
And I think you've asked a really good question when you're kind of looking at a boy. The question shouldn't necessarily be, say, for the parents of that child or anyone who has an interest in the well-being of that child. The question shouldn't necessarily be, what kind of man do I want him to become? But what kind of father do I want him to become? Or what kind of husband do I want him to become? Those are actually better questions. Because they actually force you to, get into maybe more uncomfortable areas. The oughts and ought nots that our culture is often pretty uncomfortable, getting into. And so So we were, on the one hand, it was good to see an article like this, and it was obviously an opinion piece published in the New York Times, sort of highlighting this serious problem that we have with boys in our country, but also disappointed that it didn't really dive into what we believe is the biggest factor that is creating the problem, which is absent fathers and a lack of married households. Yep. The percentage of households in our nation that are two-parent married families raising children continues to just decline and decline and decline. And so you have boys growing up in father-absent homes. Exactly. And then they don't have the male-only institutions to turn to for help and guidance on how to become a husband and a father that our society would actually need to thrive.
Right, because we've taken all those and made them co-ed.
Right.
And they even talked about, one of the other ones they talked about was the Boys and Girls Club, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excuse me, Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
And they talked about the fact that the vast majority of the volunteers to be mentors in Big Brothers, Big Sisters is, guess who? Women.
Yeah, right.
So girls, they pick up mentors quickly.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But boys, they wait for years to get someone to do that.
Yep.
And so the answer to that is what?
Yeah.
I mean, look, the reality is that, look, if you've got someone who says, I'm going to be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you, your child's probably going to be less likely to need, quote, a mentor. And I talk about mentoring two ways, because we dealt with this a lot in National Fatherhood Initiative. There are what I call transactional mentors, and then there are transformational mentors, right? Mm. So a transactional mentor would be, okay, you need to learn how to throw a curveball. Mm-hmm. It's a transaction, or there's a skill that you're trying to develop, right? So I will mentor you to help you develop that skill, right? But then there are what I call transformational mentors. And a transformational mentor is, I'm invested in your life. I'm not invested in this specific transaction. I'm investing in you as a person. Like that kind of thing. Well, fatherhood, right? And husband, like that, that's transformational mentoring, right? Because you're building a covenant relationship, if you will, with that person. And even if they mess up, you're I'm invested. Whereas transactional tend to be not covenant, tend to be more consumer.
One more short
like
term.
if you're coming to practice and this, that, and the other, I'll help you. But if you don't come to practice, I ain't seeking you out, because this is a transaction thing. And these mentoring programs, even at their best, often, it's hard to get somebody to think transformationally when the whole construct is set up transaction. Right? That's why men as husbands and fathers are so critically important. It's a transformational institution. In other words, it's a distinction between a covenant relationship and a consumer relationship. Covenant is like, I'm there for you, right? I will do what I'm supposed to do, even if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Like, that's what parents, I don't love you just because you with your kids. If you do the stuff I tell you, then I love you. And if you don't, then it's because you have a covenant relationship with your child, right?
Right.
A father has a covenant relationship with his sons and his daughters, right?
Right.
But if it's a consumer relationships, I will do what I'm supposed to do, provided that you do what you're supposed to do. So as a baseball coach, you paid your fee, then you can play on the team. I'll play catch with you.
Right.
But in a covenant relationship, it's like, wait a minute, you're my son. I'm investing in. Oh, by the way, I'm not just interested in whether you can throw a good curveball. I'm also concerned about how you deal with winning and losing. I'm concerned about how you, it's a whole there's a whole other layers there that these institutions, as good as they are, can't replace that. So in the 1900s, we still had this marriage ethic that was giving us a transformational perspective, even with these fathers being out of home. But now we've lost that.
Yep.
And we're trying to lock into, you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. We keep on just trying to find substitutes, and they're never going to be able to replace the real thing, right? Yeah. So rather than saying, well, let's just try to get back to the real thing, which again involves values and oughts and ought nots and uncomfortable conversations that people don't want to have, we just talk about mentoring, which is great. Mentoring's great, no question about it. And the authors of this article talk about the importance of mentoring and the helpful aspect of mentoring, which is, again, awesome. Yeah. But they talked about mentoring, but didn't talk about fatherhood, which is bizarre if you think about it.
And you can't talk about fatherhood in isolation. You have to talk about married fatherhood as well.
For sure.
And one of the things that I would always tell people, because you remember that when we were at National Father Initiative, people say, oh, yes, we want good fathers, but we don't want to talk about marriage.
Right, yes.
They say, we talk about marriage. No, we can't talk. Let's talk about
the M word. We used to call it the M word. People didn't want to talk about marriage.
Don't want that. And so I came up with this equation. You maybe remember.
I do remember your equation. Yeah. I'm going to write it down.
It was P equals M plus P equals M plus L.
That's right.
You remember that?
I always put L plus M, but I guess the order doesn't really matter that much.
No, it's math.
Right.
What property is that?
That's there's a property where you can
yeah, it's one of
like L plus M is the same as M plus L.
Yeah.
Transitive.
One of our listeners will let us know.
Is it the transitive property?
That's what I was going to think.
That might be what
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or one of our listeners will correct.
That's exactly. Yes.
Like some like
I know we have
great teacher will.
That's right.
Vince and Roland, you guys, you have no business doing this thing. But But what I would talk about is I would say, because we want high levels of fatherhood participation. We want that, and all these groups. We want high levels. And I go, okay, you want that? Yes, okay. And I would use this equation, which is okay. Participation, right, is driven by motivation plus location, right? So you want high involvement. So in other words, you got to have a father who's motivated, and motivation is tied to skills, right? So if you don't have skills, you're probably not motivated. Like I don't play golf because I stink at it.
Right.
But maybe if I spent like 2 years playing with Tiger Woods every weekend and eating, gosh, I bet you that my motivation would increase.
Because your skills have increased.
As my skills increase. And that's why here at CareNet, why we focus on things like Dr. Dad and different
building father
skills. Why? Because this guy facing a pregnancy decision may be running from it. Why? Because he doesn't have skills. He didn't see a father. He didn't have a father in the home. So we start in the pregnancy centers helping him develop those skills, which increases his motivation. But that's a problem if he's not in the right location. So if you have a father who's highly motivated, but he's not in the location with his kid, then you're not going to get high participation. So then, is there an institution that's designed to put highly skilled and motivated fathers in the location with their children? Is there an institution out there that could maybe make that happen? Right? And I would just walk people through this. So, you want the father involved. Okay, what do you want to do? How often do you want to see the kid? Well, I want to see the kid often. Well, how often? Well, and you just walk through that. Okay, the mother's probably going to be there, right? So I just want him living in the home or whatever. Okay, well, great. Okay, then who's probably going to be there? The mother. Okay, what kind of relationship do you want him to have with the mother? Like her, love her? I mean, as you walk through that, you realize that the father in the home with a high quality, low conflict marriage, and from our standpoint, also building out the biblical framework, right, is going to be in the location so that when he has the skills that lead to the motivation, you get the participation that you want.
That's right.
You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Participation is location plus motivation, for sure.
Absolutely. And that's the part they don't want to talk. And that's the part that's missed in the article.
Right.
A, fatherhood is missed.
Yeah.
And B, marriage is missed. And marriage is what drives, married father drives him to that location, the best societal glue to connect fathers to their kid, to heart.
Right.
Is marriage.
Yeah. And I remember these conversations like it was yesterday, right? And folks would say things along the lines of, fathers who don't live with their children can be just as involved in their children's lives. And certainly there are some who are, but on average, clearly, it's just much more logistically difficult for that to happen. And what we also find is when the father and the mother don't have a positive relationship with each other, which is why they're not living with each other.
Yes.
That over time, that the father's relationship with his children deteriorates. So yes, maybe for the first year of the child's life, he might have this level of participation that seems similar to a married father living in the home, but over time that deteriorates. In fact, what we found is that there's kind of these groups of three that are about equal in size. So among fathers who don't live with their children, about a third have zero contact with their kids. So 1/3 of fathers who don't live in the same home as their children have no contact with them whatsoever.
Yes.
Another third has minimal contact, once a month ish, right? And then the other third is more than once a week or something like that. So that could be twice a week.
Yeah.
Right? Which is okay, I guess. I mean, if I got to see my kids 8 times a month, I would feel that's not really a whole lot.
Yeah.
But again, but that was quote, highly involved fathers that are not living in the home with their children. So 1/3 of them are seeing their kids more than once a week.
Yeah.
And people would point to that and be like, see?
Yeah.
And it's again, this is not a selfish or arrogant sort of thing, but okay, I'm married to the mother of my children, and I get to tuck my kids into bed every single night.
Yeah.
It's not once or twice a week where I spend time with them. So it's just this bizarre thing. And again, it's all how do we get around having to talk about marriage?
Absolutely. And what you see in those situations, right, is that when you have a married mother, she serves as a gateway to her kids. Like my wife would say, Roland, you need to spend time with you. she's a gateway. She's like pointing to that. But when you have the unmarried situation, she actually becomes a gatekeeper too often.
Absolutely.
Right? Because now this becomes a bit, transactional. You made me unhappy, therefore I'm going to close the gate. And that's what we saw over time. And the other thing that happens is when you're in a non-married situation, you're much more likely to produce children with somebody else.
Oh, for
so
sure.
you, again, high motivation. But if you've got 3 kids with 3 different baby mamas, unless you can transcend the space-time continuum,
right.
and Kentuckian, it's just practically illogical.
Right, for
that
sure.
You would expect a father who's not married to the mother of his children to have the same level of impact, even if he's same skill, the same level of impact as the one who does.
It's just logistically impossible.
It's logistically.
And then, of course, just from the non-logistical aspects of it, we need fathers to be that example, like you said, right? Married to the mother of their children. Because again, we shouldn't necessarily be asking for that boy, what kind of man do we want him to be? We should be asking what kind of husband and father do we want him to be? And when his own father is there sacrificially every day, married to mom and in the home, that obviously speaks volumes, and it breaks cycles, right?
Breaks the cycle.
And it broke the cycle for your own kids, right?
Absolutely. And again, I'm passionate about this because I lived that world. I mean,
for sure,
with a single mother, and my father was probably in the second category. We call them holy days of fathering obligation, like my birthday and Christmas and stuff like that.
Right.
But in terms of a day-to-day involved in my life, he was not. He got married, had more kids, and guess what?
Yeah.
He was connected to those kids, but he wasn't connected to us.
Right.
Just logically, by the grace of God, I know that he helped me kind of work through that, and now I'm an advocate for that. From my own experience, that's why I don't want other kids to feel that. But I also know with my situation that I married the mother of my kid. We've been married for 43 years, and guess what? High levels of fatherhood participation in my case, right? Because I was married to the mother.
And actually something you just said, and maybe this will be helpful for our listeners in terms of discerning some of the things, the research and studies and articles that they see out there about this. But something you said is really important. You mentioned that when your father got remarried and had other children, he was an involved father with those children. What a huge flaw in a lot of the studies that are done is that they will look at that and say that father is involved with those kids, right? But it'll ignore the fact that he has other children that he's not involved with.
Exactly.
Right? And so, again, you just have to have discernment here and kind of look very closely. And in fact, I've seen other studies that have shown that, again, that non-cohabiting fathers, right? Fathers that aren't involved in their children's lives can be just as involved as married fathers. But what it does is it only looks at the fathers who actually are involved. Right? So it'll take the fathers in that 1/3 category that are actually engaged in the somewhat daily lives of their children, who are not living with their children, and say, see, when fathers aren't living with their children, they're, quote, just as involved. But it actually doesn't study the other 2/3 that are basically not involved at all. So it compares married married fathers who are living in the same home as their children with fathers who are not living at home with their children and are involved in their lives, and compares those two groups rather than comparing, well, how about the other 67% of fathers who have kids who are completely disconnected from them as a result of not living in the same home as them. So again, these are tricks that researchers do to, again, we don't want to talk about the importance of marriage.
That's right.
So we will find any excuse, and we'll even fudge our study results and have bad samples and whatever, so that we can show that you could be just as great of a dad. And certainly there are some that absolutely can be, and there's lots of circumstances that cause these issues, right? But as a society, we need to kind of think about on the whole, what is the situation that is going to be ideal for children, and trying to build that and promote that and talk about it and fund it, do whatever we need to do to make it happen, right? So again, great study in Virginia, Brad Wilcox, University of Virginia, and again, connected to this boy crisis article from the New York Times, where they fail to talk about things like this study that show that the most important thing that boys need is actually an involved father.
Yes.
Right? And so really interesting stuff. But
you want to solve the boy crisis, then you have to solve the fatherhood crisis.
Yep.
You solve the fatherhood crisis, and you're going to be much more likely to solve the boy crisis.
Yeah. And linking back to a recent podcast about what it takes to be cool.
Yeah.
it's just not cool to talk about
Yeah.
dads being married to mom and, sacrificing for themselves and living. That's just not cool.
Yeah, it's just not.
And so people avoid talking about it at any cost.
And that's why, as we kind of close,
mentoring's cool, right?
Yeah, mentor, exactly.
Let's talk about mentoring because that's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the reality,
But married fatherhood,
married fatherhood, that's cool, not cool.
Yeah.
And again, certainly when you think of from God's desire and His heart, it's not for every boy or girl, for that matter, to have a good mentor.
Right. Right.
That's no version of the Bible.
Yeah. Right. No, for sure.
But for them to have a good father,
Yes.
a good and godly father.
That's
and
right.
For the mother that brought them into the world to have a good and godly husband. That's the high idea.
Absolutely.
And certainly, that's the thing that we focus on at CareNet in terms of what we're trying to do and the connection to the life issue. And certainly in the public square, we want to be promoting that and encouraging that as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Amen. Thank you, Ron.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of CareCast. For more pro-abundant life commentary and practical resources, please visit care-net.org. There you can subscribe to the Abundant Life blog, giving you access to videos, ebooks, podcasts, and other resources to help turn your pro-life passion into pro-abundant life action. Until next time, we pray that God blesses you and yours daily.